Behind me is the brand new BMW 5 Series, the G60, a car that looks a bit controversial, is a lot bigger, and is pitched as a slightly different model to any 5 Series that has gone before it. It is an all-new model that replaces the very pretty G30, and it's not as pretty. However, it also brings important powertrain changes, and even this has had an impact on the way the 5 Series looks. So the G60 is around 10 centimeters longer than the G30 it replaces. It is also 32 millimeters wider than before, and also 36 millimeters higher. I think it looks really good from the side, although I do have a problem with the fact that it is taller, because you do notice this, and it makes it look less sleek and elegant compared to the G30. The front fascia bears all the trademarks of a modern BMW, with this style of daytime running lights, a huge grille, most of which doesn't allow air to come through. It's actually just this part. My tester is a 520D without the M Sport pack, but I think this is a good looking 5 Series even without the M pack. It looks sporty enough. There are no longer any fog lights on the bumper. You just get this aerodynamic feature here. And in fact, the entire grille, you could say, is an aerodynamic feature because it is mostly closed off, as I said. The front end of the car looks quite upright, and I like that. And I also like that the daytime running lights are actually slanted forward to harken back to some shark-nosed BMWs of the 70s and 80s. That's a really cool touch. One thing I will say though is that I don't think this car looks as rear-wheel drive as the one it replaces. I wouldn't say it looks front-wheel drive, as some people have said, but I would have certainly liked to see the A-pillar moved a bit further back. This car looks like it has quite a big greenhouse, to be honest. And this does translate into plenty of headroom. I can't help but compare this car to the E60 5 Series generation in my head. It too was seen as a bit controversial when it was introduced, but it kept enough 5 Series-ness that it has actually aged pretty well. I think you'll agree that it's a prettier car than the G60, and it's all down to it having the classic BMW sedan proportions. Had BMW adopted Mercedes' strategy of having parallel lineups of ICE and electric models, and if the 5 Series and i5 were completely different models riding on different platforms, the proportions of the 5 Series would have surely stayed much closer to what we'd become accustomed to with the 5 Series nameplate over the decades. Leave me a comment and tell me which manufacturer did it right in this respect, BMW or Mercedes. And if you're enjoying the video so far, it will mean a lot to me if you liked it and subscribed for more one-tire fire, car enthusiast focused videos. And I also don't like the fact that the hood line rises. I would have preferred it to be more parallel to the ground. You could say it looks a bit like a tall and more angular Mercedes CLS, and this marks a pretty big departure from any 5 Series that has gone before it. I do love the mirrors and how they're integrated into the side trim here. It's a really cool integration, and the mirrors themselves are really cool. They have a slightly unusual shape. I also like this detail along the side sills. It's part of the whole crystal theme that BMW has going on. Just like the headliner in the XM, for instance. This is basically the same pattern. And this is the spot that projects your puddle light. I do like this 5 here though. Some people have criticized it and have said it's too much, but I don't agree. BMW didn't normally hide its car's exhausts like its rivals from Merc and Audi. However, that trend is changing, and base BMWs these days have their exhausts hidden, poking out from under the bumper. And the G60, with or without the M-Pack, is not an exception. It's as if now that BMW has launched a fully electric version of the 5 Series, it is ashamed that it still offers ICE-powered variants of the car, and it's desperately trying to make all its models look like EVs, for some reason. Let's quickly open up the trunk, because I'm getting rained on. So this is actually marginally smaller than in the vehicle it replaces, and it's a slightly awkward shape, since you can only fit items that are about this wide inside of it, because there are these bulkheads here that limit the width. You can fold down the rear seats, although you have to push them because they don't go down automatically. I think this is about 10 liters down on the old car. It has optional automatic electric closing. Let's see what it's like in the back. So as I was saying, this car has grown compared to the G30 it replaces. I don't understand why BMW removed the pocket or the netting from behind the front seats. I'm not sure what's up with that, but at least you get the tablet holder, right? This car has the optional 2-zone climate control in the back with a touch interface here. You can adjust the fan speed, where the air blows. enable the heat for the seat. I like how the vents here are actually upturned a little bit so that they blow air up instead of into this part of the rear seat. There's also an armrest in the back, which you just flip down easily like this. It has integrated cup holders. I would have liked them to be of the pop-out variety. And if you're wondering why I don't like this style of cup holder, is because, well, you can put your elbow in it by accident. This car also has the optional panoramic roof. This particular one doesn't open, but you can get a smaller one that does open. Interestingly, it opens and closes from the front. So that's pretty much it for the back. There's plenty of space even for me. I'm 183 centimeters tall. Oh yeah, and before we move to the front, I have to show you this contrasting middle headrest. All of the other headrests in the car are in this light oyster type colored upholstery, but this one is black and it looks great. As soon as I've climbed aboard, I instantly feel cocooned in luxury. The materials generally feel quite nice, except for this quite nasty stuff around the buttons, the window buttons. I don't really like the quality of this, but there you go. It's not the nicest feeling plastic, but this feels super nice, as it does in the back. So the entire rear door card is nice and pleasant, except for the lower part, just like in the front. I mean, this is hard plastic. This is a textile type material. This is also hard plastic. Is it hard though? I can't really tell. No, I think it's hard. This is also hard. So this area, I guess, feels kind of cheap. As with many new BMW models, the manufacturer has removed many buttons and has grouped functions into these menu buttons, like this one with the 3 lines. So whenever you see a button with 3 lines in a new BMW, that means it's going to take you to a menu. So for instance, this one takes you to your driving settings. This one opens up your light settings, which, by the way, I have a big problem with because you cannot adjust anything when the car is on. So you can just do this, but everything else is grayed out. Maybe sometimes I want the car on, but only the side lights on. There's another menu button here on the door, which is a touch button. This takes you to your seat menu, and so on. Unlike in the 7 Series, the glove box isn't operated by a digital control. You still have a physical button here that you release it with. And it's actually nicely padded and pleasant to touch. These door pockets go back a long way, but I'm not sure what you can put back there. Maybe a small umbrella that you could yank out when it rains. This car has iDrive 8.5, which runs on a 12.3-inch screen in front of the driver and a 14.9-inch screen in the center of the dashboard. There's also wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and the screen itself works remarkably well, although it's ever so slightly laggy now for some reason. Not sure what's up with that. There are no more physical climate controls. All of the climate functions have been relocated to this menu. You can also program some settings to come on automatically for the climate, so you won't have to do them every time. And this is what BMW is pushing with all this minimalism. They say that they've not only relocated most of the controls from a physical button to a menu, but they say they've also automated many functions so that you don't have to set them manually anymore. You just tell the car how you like them and then it will handle it for you. What do you think of this steering wheel though? It's very unusual. The M Sport steering wheel, which this isn't, has a bit of a more conventional shape. This one is flat here, but it's also flat here, and flat on the top. And I'm sure this part here will be a bitch to clean because you can't access some of the dirt. There's already some dirt in there. I've set my driver's seat in the lowest possible position, but I think the steering wheel could come a bit lower. But even in spite of the weird shape, the steering wheel still feels great in your hand. It's still the thick kind of steering wheel that BMW has been putting in its cars in recent years, although this part of the grip is actually quite thin, I would say. Another noteworthy change with this new 5 Series and other brand new BMWs is the fact that they've hidden the air vents for the climate controls. You can see the passenger one there, for instance, but the central ones are completely hidden. Or are they? Because they're actually here and here. And this just controls the amount of air that you want to pass through them. The direction is controlled with this knobbly thing here, which is actually quite cleverly hidden because you don't really see it. The hazard button is a touch button. Below these controls are a pair of phone holders, although only this one on the driver's side is actually a wireless charger. This is just for someone else to put their phone in there. I'm not sure why they didn't make both of them wireless chargers, but there you go. You also have a pair of cup holders here that you cannot cover with anything. And behind them you have a pair of USB-Cs that feature both charging and data connections. You get this new console, which is very, very shiny. It reflects everything, especially that tree that you can see through the panoramic roof. I like that it has this crystal thing. I'm a fan of BMW's crystal details, to be honest. And I also like the noise that this makes when you turn it. It feels very precise and premium. Although it does show fingerprints very easily, as does the rest of this glossy stuff. The dinky selector, which is also crystal in this car. A separate park button here, the auto hold. I also like the volume control that BMW stole from Mercedes, and you can use it with your thumb, which I like. Very cool to sit in the front of this car. You feel very pleasant. The design is excellent. It feels luxurious. You almost forget that this is a 5 Series, and you might be forgiven for thinking that it is a 7. Because of the spaciousness, the quality of the materials, but how it drives is also hugely important for a 5 Series. Let's see how refined the 520D is when it starts up. It's really, really smooth. There is some 4-cylinder diesel roughness that makes its way into the cabin, but it's only really present at idle, and once you get moving, it all sounds rather creamy. Because it's a mild hybrid, the 520D ditches the traditional starter motor for a more powerful multi-purpose unit. This integrated starter generator can not only provide boost for brief squirts of acceleration, but it also makes the start-stop system exceedingly smooth. The engine restarts in a very quiet and unintrusive manner, to the point where you almost don't feel any vibration when it spins into life. This engine is a development of the B47 that BMW equipped the previous generation of this car with. It now makes 197 horsepower at 4,000 RPM, and its peak torque rating of 400 Newton meters is delivered flat between 1,500 and 2,750 RPM, making the car feel surprisingly muscular. Diesels have a tendency to do this, and even this latest 520D is not an exception. BMW quotes this vehicle, a 520D with xDrive like my tester, as being able to sprint to 100 km per hour from a standstill in 7.3 seconds and top out at 228 km per hour. Those are more than respectable numbers, but neither turns this into a particularly sporty car. Although the fact that it can reach a relatively high top speed means it's excellent for high-speed cruising on the Autobahn, which you can only do in Germany, but this is a German car after all. Rear wheel steering makes this 5 Series feel really maneuverable. The rear wheels can turn up to 2.5 degrees in the opposite direction to the front wheels at lower speeds. This is done to improve maneuverability and make the wheelbase feel smaller, but the wheels can also turn in the same direction as the fronts at higher speeds to improve stability. I would also say that this is one of the most natural feeling rear wheel steering systems that I've ever experienced. This might have something to do with BMW's tuning, but maybe the 2.5 degree value is the sweet spot, because in many vehicles, when you feel the intervention of the rear axle steering, it might feel disconcerting, unnatural, and it may not instill confidence. In this 5 Series, I enjoyed the way the rear wheel steering worked from the first second I started driving this car, and I had to maneuver it out of a tight parking garage. It has a double wishbone front suspension and a multi-link rear. No air suspension is offered on the 5 Series, but you can spec optional adaptive dampers that you really should pick if you're buying this car, because they make a huge difference to the ride comfort. If you opt for the more expensive of the two M suspension packs, the car also gets active anti-roll bars, which run off the 48-volt mild hybrid system's battery, whose capacity is about 0.5 kilowatt hours. My car has the optional adaptive dampers, but it doesn't have the active anti-roll bars, and it does roll through the corners a little bit, but it's not at all bad. The plug-in hybrid and fully electric versions of this come as standard with air suspension for the rear axle. So with the extra long wheelbase of this car, which is similar to that of a 7 Series from 2 generations ago, spaciousness and ride comfort are supreme in this car. It is a brilliant long-distance cruiser. It will take you to where you need to go and get you there quite refreshed. And I'm sure the ride comfort would be even better if the car didn't have these pretty big 20-inch wheels. They do look pretty nice and they have an aerodynamic design, but I would just recommend sticking to the 18-inch base wheels if comfort is your top priority. And with this car, with how it's set up, because this is a less sporty offering than the previous 5 Series that is just now going to pass us, towing an ATV. This, I think, illustrates why the 5 Series is a great car. Any generation. People just cover thousands upon thousands of miles in these cars. And the 5 Series is one of the best long-distance cruisers that I can think of. Even better than the bigger cars, because those tend to be overly heavy, they have bigger engines, and they're very expensive, so they're not for everyone. The car can also drive itself. It has all the necessary technology to do it, but because of legal reasons, you can only do it in Germany and a couple of other countries, or in the US, where you can take your hands completely off the wheel and let the car handle the steering for you on the highway. It can also perform automatic lane changes, and speaking of legal reasons, BMW has also introduced a speed warning alert when you exceed the speed limit, which is always enabled when you restart the vehicle, so you always have to go into this menu and deactivate it. So I'm traveling now at an indicated 141 kilometers per hour, ever so slightly over the speed limit here, and refinement is supreme. I'm getting vague hints of wind hiss around the mirrors, and there's also a bit of tire noise from these quite big and wide tires. But this car, even without air suspension, just has the ability to make everything feel smooth and relaxed. And since this is a German car, it will retain its refinement up to speeds that we cannot even discuss here in Romania. So if I put my foot down now, 60, 70, so it picks up speed quite quickly. Since this is a smaller engine 5 Series, you will notice the weight of passengers affecting the car's performance and acceleration more so than you would in a 6-cylinder engine version of this car, which by the way is coming next year. So right now, you can only get the 5 Series in Europe with either a 4-cylinder diesel, the 520D that I'm driving today, and the 520i. Both of them can be had with xDrive, and the only gearbox you can have is an 8-speed ZF transmission. No more manuals in the 5 Series. BMW plans to add plug-in hybrid versions of the car to the range by the end of the year, if it hasn't done so by the time I'm uploading this video. And next year it will add 6-cylinder engines, both gasoline and diesel, to the range. There will also be an M5, thankfully, but in keeping with the times, it's gonna be a plug-in hybrid, which will borrow its powertrain from the XM Super SUV. And it's expected to make 750 horsepower, which should work wonders towards mitigating the extra weight of the plug-in hybrid power system. Probably the biggest news with this 5 Series is the addition of fully electric versions. BMW designed this vehicle on its cluster architecture to be able to take a big battery pack in its floor. That's why it sits higher. And it has allowed BMW to offer full EVs without having to create a parallel range of electric models like Mercedes has done. It currently offers the i5, which is what the electric 5 Series is called, in either eDrive 40 configurations, so this is the base EV with a single rear motor, but also an M60 xDrive model, which has 2 motors, 600 horsepower, and is able to push the car, which in that configuration weighs probably 2.4 tons, to 100 kilometers per hour in under 4 seconds. However, I don't think it's as good to drive as some of the internal combustion engine versions of this car, because the extra weight impacts the handling, the sportiness, and the way the car brakes, so it's not going to feel as sporty as this. And it's funny that, even though the i5 M60 is the top-of-the-line performance model in the G60 lineup, I'm calling a 520D sportier to drive. And it really is, since sportiness is a lot more than just being fast in a straight line. Sure, the i5 M60 is going to obliterate the lowly 520D in a straight line, but around the corner, I know I'd much rather be in the lighter and more chuckable diesel car. And my tester had 245 section Pirelli P0s up front and 275s in the back, so it really held on around the bends. And speaking of sportiness, since I'm approaching a few bends, I'm going to put the car in sport mode, which by the way, in all newer BMWs, you have to do through the My Modes button, which takes you to this screen, and then you tap sport, then you have to tap activate because it deactivates the traction control, and then it's activated. In my tester with the comfort seats, fully electric of course, The bolsters tighten around you when you put the car in sport. The steering, which is otherwise too light and vague for my taste, it is at odds with older BMW steering systems, which used to be quite weighty. But this one, in its normal mode, which by the way is called personal mode, even though you can't personalize it, but in normal mode, it feels like it has a city steering button like a Fiat. It really is that light. In sport, however, it does weight up a bit, and since the car comes as standard with a variable ratio steering rack, you don't really have to apply that much lock. So let's show it a corner here. There's definitely a bit of body roll, without question. And at higher speeds, you don't feel the intervention of the rear wheel steering because the rear wheels are no longer steering in the opposite direction to the front, but they're still intervening and helping you keep the trajectory that you want through the corners. The car can handle tight and twisty roads, but it's these longer sweeping corners that suit it best. It just takes them in its stride. It feels so competent and sure-footed. And even in sport mode, the suspension is wonderful. And once it does settle in and you get used to the roll, you do start to gain confidence and you can push this car a bit harder. The seating position is pretty good. This is a BMW. They don't get this wrong, ever. And the G60 is no exception. As I've said, the car itself is a bit taller than the G30, so you do feel like you're sitting that little bit higher, but you can get the seat really low, and it's a really nice place to spend time. This car is also a real tech fest. So it's running iDrive 8.5, which alters a few things compared to other iterations of iDrive 8 that I've experienced. So it groups certain controls here in the center, like your media, nav, climate, the home button, this button that takes you to the confusing menu with all the icons, your phone menu, and Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, depending on what you're using. You still have these two defrost buttons here, which are touch controls, and they're always in the same place, so you can use them almost exclusively with muscle memory after a while, I think. But for changing the temperature and other climate settings, you do have to do that through the screen. And I'm not sure if it's the same in other cars with iDrive 8, but you can now enable seat heating, cooling, and the heated steering wheel by tapping the seat icon here next to your temperature zone. The screen itself is brilliant. It's a 14.9-inch screen that we've seen in other BMWs. Its resolution is fantastic. The processing power of this unit is apparently so good that you can now play games in your BMW. I'm not going to do that because every other journalist and their mother have done it, but you can use your phone as a controller and you can play various simple games in this car. Oh, how Tesla-esque. A base 520D in Europe is gonna cost from around 60,000 euros. I think under 60,000 euros. However, my tester as spec'd, it cost 89,000 euros, of which almost 25,000 euros are options. And to name the ones that I most noticed, I have to give a shout out, literally, to the Bowers & Wilkins sound system. It's a 1,300 euro option, but boy does it sound good. It sounds better than other Bowers & Wilkins sound systems that I've experienced in BMWs and other cars. I think it might even be the best one I've heard from this brand. The rear wheel steering is also optional. The pedals on the steering wheel are standard, but I don't think this is the kind of car where you want to use the pedals unless you need engine braking while you're descending a mountain road or something. And the 20-inch wheels that I mentioned earlier, they cost almost 3,000 euros. But even if this car costs 89,000 euros, which seems like an absurd amount for a 520D, this car doesn't have massaging seats, it doesn't have a heated steering wheel, it doesn't have the M-Pack, and there are other options that you can add to this, the merino leather. I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to configure this, that you can get a 520D to exceed 100,000 euros. In fact, I'm sure you can. This car will be remembered as a transitional 5 Series, one that BMW made taller and more unusual looking so that it could be made an EV. I don't think it will be remembered as a style icon, although this interior is freaking fantastic, to be honest. And I don't think it will be remembered as a driver's 5 Series either. What you're getting here is a mini 7 Series.